Hi, my name is Jarian and I'm the founder of API Builder. I'd like to give you a tour of API Builder and some of the capabilities that allow you to push out APIs a lot faster. So if we jump right into the URL bar and type in apibuilder.app, you'll see that you're immediately shown our front page that lets you dive immediately into building out your app. Something to kind of note is that we are using HTTPS. That is actually a requirement of having a .app domain, and security is a concern throughout the entire app building experience as well as the API that you build using our system. So I want to dive into one of the first experiences you have on the website. You can see a button here is that takes you to the quick walkthrough on how to use API Builder. Currently, I am in the process of recording this video at this moment, so this link doesn't really take you to my video, but it takes you to a nice little Easter egg for the site. But yes, that will all go away once this video gets recorded. But you can close out of that. Once you've watched that video, which is this video, you'll be able to more quickly dive into API Builder and push out some of the apps that you might be dying to actually create. So you have about 3 options when you come onto this website. So the first thing you can see is this thing called current route groups. So as you may know, an API kind of is this routing system that allows you to get different objects out of your database and different attributes about your object, right? And so every time you make a set of routes that access some particular piece of data, that's going to be called one route group. And you can click this button to actually go through the process of making more route groups. The second option that you see over here is the ability to set your API name. This is fairly simple. You can just supply just a name here, and it allows you to set your API name. So that's the confirmation there that your API will now just be called test. So when we export it, the file will have test on its name so that you know what API you just made. And then the third option here is the generate full API button. This won't do anything right now because we don't have any route groups established, but you can use this to actually download a zip file of your entire API that you can then go and deploy on your own servers. So let's go ahead and dive into making a route group. So the first thing you see here is establishing an object name. So right here we have an example of a user object, and let's just say that we do want to go ahead and dive into making that user object. We click this button to define object to go to the next page. Here on the next page, we are presented with defining the object attributes. This will be any attribute that you might want on your user object in the database. So thinking about a user object, usually a user has like a username, an email, a password, and other interesting little attributes attached to them. So we'll just start with those 3 for this simple API. One of the things you might note is that ID is already defined in this table for you. So this comes in by default. Right now you can't change that, but the ID is just this unique number that's going to allow you to access this object, whether it's out here in a JavaScript request to the server, or if you just want to query the database yourself, you can always query by this object's ID to immediately get that object out of the database. So right now we said that we're defining a user object. Some other attributes a user object might have is a username, right? And we come over here and we have to establish a type. And we have 5 types to choose from. You might think of a number as anything like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A decimal is anything like 1.2, 3.14. A word it can be anything like a collection of word or words. So thinking things like name or locations. So this would be a good one to choose for now. True or false, we'll come back to this, but this is thinking whether or not there can only be 2 answers for something, whether or not like this is on or is it off, is it true or false, is it yes or no. And then you have this date and time, which is a great thing for just storing the actual time in the day, and then getting really particular about having the exact date and the time. This is a good catch-all for whatever situation you're in, even if you only care about one attribute out of this. So let's go ahead and define this username as word or words. And we also said that a user might have an email. So we go over here and we also say that that would be words. And then we come over here and we say that a user might also have a password, which we also expect that to be words. Keep in mind that words can just be a string of characters. So if you're a coder, you can think of this just as a string. But yeah, this is more common nomenclature. So now that we've established a user object, we can go ahead and click the View Routes button to see some of the routes that we can expect the generator to print out for us. So we see it follows CRUD. And if you don't know what CRUD is, it is creating, reading, updating, and deleting. That's a common protocol that we see on REST APIs. So we go ahead and automatically generate that for you here. But you will have the option to add routes later. I'll show you how to do that in future videos. But right now we just see that, okay, we have 4 routes here that we can use to actually query against this user object out of the database. So when we say that looks good, we go ahead and click save on that, and we can see that we now have a user route group out here. So that's pretty cool. You can continue to go through this entire process. So I'll make another one really quickly just to show it off again. And it wants me to do test, so I'll do test here. And we'll just say that this is a test 1, and it takes a number. This is a test 2, and let's just say that it takes a decimal. This is a test 3, and it takes a word. Test 4, it takes a true or false, and a test 5, and that takes our date time. So we go ahead and click view our routes, and we click save, and it is out here ready for us to call and generate our API. So I've already shown you how to name the API. You can expect the name to already be test. So when I go to click generate the full API, I'm expecting to get routes uniquely for the user object and for the test object. So let's go ahead and click that. And right here, you see that we did indeed get a zip file called release_test, which is the name of our API. So let's go ahead and click that. So I'm on Mac, so it went ahead and unzipped the zip file for me, and we can see that we have this folder here that we can click into and actually see some of the stuff that's located here. So that's really nice. We get a few files for free, and we get a database folder, a server folder, a static folder, and a templates folder. If you want to kind of dive into this more deeply, we can jump over into Visual Studio Code. We go into downloads. And we'll open this folder. So here we see that our folder is over here. We have these generated Python files. And that is one thing to note, is that the generated API, in the MVP stages, we've chosen to go with Flask for handling our routes. Flask is a framework on the Python language, and it is Python version 2.7. We are planning on expanding support for even more popular languages. So that includes updating to Python 3, taking on Node.js, React, and even taking on app languages like Swift and Java or Kotlin for newer app development. So just to give you a quick rundown of some of the things in here, you can expect further videos talking about how to actually go in here and edit values. But you can see immediately that you have this run.py file, which allows you to actually run your API it's set up. This is actually just generated code, so you can see it's very nicely laid out, so you can jump in and actually start deploying right away onto your server. There might be things that you have to change, like turn this to a wgi.py if you want to deploy it with some other web app, and you have to set up Nginx and all that stuff. But those are features that we'll add in the future if you want to not have to do all that stuff yourself. And then here you see a config.py. A thing to call out here is this app token. This is a security feature that we give to you for off the bat so that only you are able to access your API. So eventually we will deploy your app for you onto the cloud. And so you will have to have this app token whenever you query against that API just to validate that it's actually you calling this app. And that's just one line of protection for you as you're developing your apps. And then you have in here an empty templates folder. You can, since this is Flask, your index.html might go in that. You have a statics folder. Inside of here is a nice treat. It's a library folder, which has test.js and user.js. You might remember that those are the route groups that we generated over here. And as a note, this is actually the app token, the security token that you need for accessing your API when it's on the cloud, or just even running locally on your box. But you'll note over here that you have this test.js and a user.js file. And what this is a complete JavaScript library for interfacing with your API. So once again, API Builder is all about getting you up and running on building your app, whether it be a web app or a dev app, Android, Swift, or whatever. This is all about getting you up and running as fast as possible. So out of the box, we give you a JavaScript library for interfacing against your API. And you can see here that it handles things like type checking and has a complete list of all the params that you can expect to pass into your API. Everything is vanilla JavaScript, so we don't use any libraries when we're making these calls. That way we can run as light as possible, and you can have the choice on whether or not you want to add libraries in the future. Then if we come up here to server and database, you can see in the server file, this is where all the Flask routing will be. So if we jump into here, we can see a kit function that comes in. It's very lightweight, just doing some quick checking on your routes. And then you actually have these routes here that are going to be located in your test and user folder. As we walk through here, we can just see quickly that we have our CRUD fully initialized that allows us to ping our individual route groups and query on data for it. So I won't dive into this right now, but just know that this is routing against all of your object data. And you might be wondering, well, where is that object data actually being stored? That's going to be in the database class, where we've made you SQL Alchemy database classes. And what this allows you to do is export out into SQLite, SQL, and Postgres, just to name some of the supported languages in this framework. So as you see through here, we follow some of the basic, very basic layout of a SQL Alchemy app. And we give you we try to follow CRUD and giving you options on accessing your data out of the database. So you can think of the routes as mainly calling into this whenever it wants to operate on the data in the database. So having a very clear delineation of what worker is working on what part of the code base. So that pretty much is it for showing you a demo app in API Builder. I really hope that you jump on making an API with us as soon as possible. We look forward to supplying you with even more features in the future. Some of the things that we have coming down the pipe is auto deploying, which will allow you to immediately start working and querying against your app that's in the cloud. We plan on ramping up even more security efforts, so having watchdogs that run next to your app in the cloud. And we have, it's too many features to actually name right here, but I hope that you enjoy using the app, and please reach out at support@apibuilder.app if you have any issues or have any suggestions of features that we should implement in the future. Get to building.